Most people feel safe as long as their phone works. But tonight, you'll hear 10 true horror stories from places with no cell signal, where the moment connection disappeared, everything changed. Story 1. Dead zone. Have you ever driven a road so many times you could do it blind? And then one night, something about it changes? Not the road itself, something else. Something you can see but can definitely feel. I learned the hard way that some places can swallow you whole, and nobody will ever know you were there. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was driving home from my shift at the distribution center outside Bakersfield, taking the same road I had taken for 3 years. Highway 178 cuts through empty desert, past forgotten truck stops and scattered towns that barely qualify as dots on a map. Most people avoid it after dark. Too isolated. Too many stories, but I needed the job, and the highway shaved 40 minutes off my commute. I was 20 miles from home when I glanced at my phone mounted on the dashboard. No signal. Not one bar, just a blank space where the carrier name should have been. That was unusual. I always had at least 2 bars on this stretch. Always. I picked up the phone and checked it, thinking maybe I had accidentally enabled airplane mode. Nothing. The phone was working fine, searching for a signal, finding absolutely nothing. The realization came slowly. This road, this familiar, boring stretch of asphalt I had driven hundreds of times, had suddenly lost all connection to the outside world. And once that realization settled in, once I truly understood what it meant, every mile forward felt like a mistake. The darkness outside my windows seemed thicker somehow. Heavier. The headlights carved a pale tunnel through it, but beyond that cone of light, there was nothing. No distant glow of farmhouses. No other cars, just an oppressive, suffocating blackness that pressed against the glass. I told myself it was just a dead zone. Cell towers go down. Equipment fails. It happens. But something deeper, something primal in the back of my brain, was screaming that this was wrong. This was different. The highway stretched ahead, perfectly straight, perfectly empty. I checked my rearview mirror. Nothing behind me either. Not even the faint glow of headlights miles back. I was completely alone. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I tried the radio. Static on every station. AM, FM, satellite. Everything was white noise. A hissing void that made my skin crawl. I turned it off. The silence that followed was somehow worse. That is when I noticed the mile markers were wrong. I had just passed mile marker 47. I knew this road. Mile marker 51 should be next. Then 54. Then the exit for Route 65 that would take me home. But the next marker I passed read 32. Then 29. Then 19. I was going backwards. My foot hit the brake instinctively. The car slowed, tires humming on the asphalt. I stopped in the middle of the highway, engine idling, headlights stabbing into that impossible darkness. My heart hammered in my chest. This did not make sense. I had been driving forward. I had not turned around. The road had been straight the entire time. But the mile markers did not lie. Somehow, I was moving in the wrong direction. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, trying to force my brain to make sense of it. Then I saw something in my side mirror that made my blood turn to ice. A figure, standing at the edge of the road, just outside the reach of my taillights. I spun around in my seat, looking through the back window. Nothing. Empty highway. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there. Perfectly still, watching. I hit the gas. The car lurched forward, and I did not look back. My eyes stayed locked on the road ahead, on the white lines disappearing under my hood, on anything except those mirrors. My breath came fast and shallow. The horrifying realization crept through me like ice water. I was not alone on this road, and whatever was out there, it did not follow the rules of the world I knew. The next mile marker read 12. I was still going the wrong way. Panic clawed at my throat. I forced myself to think, okay, maybe I had gotten confused. Maybe I had somehow missed a turn, taken a wrong exit without realizing it. I would just keep driving until I found something familiar. A landmark, a sign, another car, anything. But the road stayed empty. The darkness stayed complete, and the mile markers kept counting down. 8, 5, 3. Then I saw the building. It appeared suddenly, materializing out of the blackness like it had been waiting for me. A small, squat structure with a flickering neon sign that read motel. Half the letters were burned out. The parking lot was gravel and weeds, not a single car in sight. The windows were dark, but a dim yellow light glowed behind the front office door. Every instinct told me to keep driving. Do not stop. Do not slow down. But I was terrified. disoriented, and desperate for some sign that I was still in the real world. Maybe someone inside could tell me what was happening. Maybe they had a working phone. I pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The sound was shockingly loud in the silence. I parked near the office and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at that sickly yellow light. The smart thing would have been to drive away. The smart thing would have been to trust my gut. But fear makes you do stupid things. I got out of the car. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been for October in the desert. My breath misted in front of my face. The silence was absolute, not even the whisper of wind, not a single cricket or distant coyote. Just crushing, eerie emptiness. I walked to the office door. Through the grimy glass, I could see a small lobby with a cracked linoleum floor and a wooden counter. No one was there. A bell sat on the counter, next to a faded guest registry that looked like it had not been used in decades. I opened the door. It creaked, loud and disturbing in the stillness. I stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Mold and decay, something rotten beneath layers of dust and abandonment. The yellow light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. Nobody came to greet me. I approached the counter and looked at the registry. The pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in names and dates. I flipped through them, my unease growing. Every entry was from 1987. August, September, October of 1987. Then nothing. The rest of the pages were blank. 37 years ago. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave. Now, this place was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. And I had made a horrifying mistake coming here. I turned toward the door. The figure from the road was standing just outside, pressed against the glass, staring at me. I could not see its face. It was too dark, too shadowed, but I could feel its eyes, cold and hungry and utterly inhuman. I stumbled backward, knocking into the counter. The bell rang. A sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the empty building. The figure did not move, did not blink, just watched. Then the light went out. The darkness was instant and complete, a suffocating blackness that swallowed everything. I could not see my own hands. I could not see the door. I could hear my own breathing, fast and panicked, and underneath that, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere inside the building. I ran. I did not think. I just moved, hands outstretched, stumbling through the dark toward where I thought the door was. I hit the glass hard, shoulder first, and the door swung open. I fell onto the gravel, scrambled to my feet, and sprinted for my car. I did not look back. I did not check the mirrors. I started the engine and floored it, tires spinning in the gravel, and shot back onto the highway. My headlights caught something in the road ahead, a line, painted across both lanes in faded white. Words, turn back. I did not slow down. I drove straight over them, and the moment my tires crossed that line, everything changed. The darkness lifted, not all at once, but gradually, like a curtain pulling back. I could see stars again, distant lights on the horizon, the glow of a town ahead. My phone buzzed, signal restored, full bars. Messages and notifications flooded in, time stamped from hours ago. I looked at the mile markers. They were correct now, going forward. I was 10 miles from home. I pulled over on the shoulder and sat there, hands gripping the wheel, shaking uncontrollably. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty and normal, lit by a pale moon. But I knew what I had seen. I knew where I had been. Some roads do not just take you from one place to another. Some roads take you somewhere else entirely. A place that is not on any map. A place that does not follow the rules. A dead zone where the world forgets you exist. I never drove that route again. I take the long way now, even though it adds an hour to my commute. Because late at night, when I am lying in bed, I still think about that motel, about the registry from 1987, about the figure at the glass, and I wonder how many other people have driven into that darkness and never come back out. Story 2. Motel where phone stopped working. My phone died at exactly 9:47 on a Tuesday night, and I didn't notice until it was far too late. The battery had been at 30% when I pulled into the Sunset Pines Motel off Highway 40, somewhere between nowhere and forgotten in the high desert of New Mexico. I remember thinking how creepy it looked, how the neon sign flickered in that unsettling way that made my stomach tighten. But I was exhausted. 12 hours of driving through empty landscape will do that to you. The motel seemed harmless enough under the dying twilight. Just another roadside place where travelers like me stop to sleep before continuing their haunted journey across America. The checking-in process felt normal. Too normal, I would realize later. The clerk behind the desk was an older man with a weathered face and eyes that didn't quite focus on mine. He barely spoke, just slid a key across the counter without making eye contact. Room 217, second floor. He mentioned nothing about the Wi-Fi password, nothing about breakfast, nothing about anything. Most motels will give you information you don't want. This one gave you nothing at all. The hallway smelled like stale cigarettes and something else, something I couldn't quite identify, but that made my skin crawl. Mold, maybe, or something darker. My room was small and clean in a way that felt artificial, like someone had wiped it down to erase something disturbing that had happened inside. The bed had a thin comforter. The bathroom tiles were ancient. The window looked out onto the parking lot where my car sat under a flickering light. Everything about it was ordinary. Nothing seemed dangerous or particularly horrifying, but there was an atmosphere to the place. A feeling. The kind of eerie sensation that makes you question your own safety without being able to explain why. That was when I tried to call my girlfriend back home to tell her I had arrived safely. That was when I discovered my phone was completely dead. I plugged it in, waited, tried again. Nothing. No charging, no response, just a blank black screen. I assumed the charger was broken. I would discover that was the least of my problems. I ordered food from the vending machine in the hallway, a sandwich that tasted like plastic and regret, then tried to sleep. The bed was harder than concrete. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard sounds from the other rooms. Footsteps, doors opening and closing. But when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The fear started then, creeping into my chest like cold water. Something about this place was wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Morning came gray and cheerless through the thin curtains. I tried my phone again. Still nothing. I decided to get a new charger at the gas station across the street, a small convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1980. I grabbed my keys, walked toward the exit, and stopped. The front door of the motel was locked. Not locked by me, locked from the outside, or maybe controlled by something else. The clerk was not at the desk. His small office was empty. I checked the time on my watch. 8:15 in the morning. I should have been able to leave. I walked back to find the clerk. The back hallway was darker than it should have been. All the lights seemed dimmer here, as if the motel itself was fading. I found him in a small room behind the office, sitting in a chair, staring at a wall. He looked almost frozen. When I spoke to him, he moved his head slowly, his eyes distant and unfocused. He told me the door lock had broken. Electrically broken. He was waiting for maintenance. In the meantime, no one could leave the motel. His voice was hollow. His hands shook when he reached for a cup of coffee that must have been cold for hours. This was terrifying in a way that was hard to understand. A broken door lock is nothing. People are trapped in places every day. But there was something about the way he said it, something about the terrible calm in his voice that made me understand I was in genuine danger. I went back to my room and tried everything I could think of. I tried every door. I tried the emergency exit, which was boarded up from the inside. I tried calling from the landline phone in my room. No dial tone, nothing. The lines were dead. By afternoon, I realized I wasn't alone in this predicament. There was a woman on the third floor who was pounding on walls, screaming that she wanted to leave. There was a man in the room next to mine who was barely moving at all. I could hear him breathing through the wall, heavy and panicked. Everyone had tried their phones. Everyone's phones were dead. Not just out of battery, dead in a way that seemed impossible. Several of us gathered in the hallway, our voices tight with fear and confusion. We were maybe 8 people total, scattered across different floors. 8 strangers trapped in a motel that was becoming increasingly eerie and unsettling with every passing hour. The woman from the third floor had another revelation. She had looked at the front desk register before the clerk disappeared. The dates on it went back years. The same dates, over and over. The same rooms booked for the same nights, repeatedly, as if the motel was trapped in a cycle of haunted repetition. The last entry was from today's date, but it showed 8 guests. There were 8 of us. The horror of understanding that we had somehow been expected, that our arrival was predetermined, settled over the group like a suffocating blanket. That night, the temperature inside the motel dropped. I could see my breath, which was impossible in the desert. The hallways became darker, the shadows deeper and more threatening. I heard footsteps constantly now, different footsteps from before. These belonged to something else. something that was moving through the motel with purpose. I locked my room door, a meaningless gesture, and sat on the bed with my dead phone in my hand, feeling completely isolated and vulnerable. The fear was total and paralyzing. The kind of fear that comes from understanding you are in genuine danger with no way out, no way to call for help, no way to contact the outside world. Around midnight, one of the other guests pounded on my door. The man from next door, his face pale and wet with sweat. He had found something in the basement, a staircase behind the laundry room, and at the bottom of the stairs, doors. Many doors, hundreds of them, he said. All locked, but scratched into the inside of one lock was a name he recognized. Someone who had gone missing from his hometown 3 years ago. Someone who had been lost and never found. I didn't want to believe him. I wanted this to be some kind of elaborate prank, some disturbing game designed to terrify us. But the way he spoke, the genuine horror in his voice, made me understand he was telling the truth as he had experienced it. We gathered in the hallway again, all 8 of us, and discussed what we knew. The motel didn't appear on any maps. Our phones were useless. The doors wouldn't open. And somewhere in this building, there was something that hunted us, that moved through the corridors at night. The second night was worse. The woman from the 3rd floor didn't come down for the early morning. We found her room empty. Not ransacked or destroyed, just empty. Her things were still there, but she was gone. Her screaming voice, which had been so insistent and present, had simply vanished. Another guest, an older man who had been trying to break through a window, was found unconscious in the hallway. When he woke up, he couldn't remember what happened. He couldn't remember the previous day. He seemed to think he had just arrived at the motel. I understood then what was happening, or at least I thought I did. The motel was feeding on something. Time, maybe? Memory, consciousness. It was keeping us here, slowly consuming our awareness and our ability to escape. The phones had stopped working not because of electrical failure, but because they represented our connection to the outside world, and this place severed those connections. The locked doors weren't physical restraints. They were part of something far more disturbing. By the 3rd day, 4 of us remained in possession of our full memories. The others had become confused, docile, almost peaceful. They moved through the motel like ghosts. Some smiled, some hummed quietly. One of them kept asking where his room was, even though he was standing in front of it. The terror deepened because I could feel it happening to me too. My thoughts were becoming slower. My sense of time was dissolving. I kept forgetting what day it was. I couldn't remember what my girlfriend's name was, and that terrified me more than anything else. We decided to find the basement. To find those doors. The man who had discovered them led the way, though he moved uncertainly, as if the memory was already fading. The basement was cold and wet, with pipes running along the ceiling and a smell like something had died in the walls years ago. The laundry room was there, exactly where he said, but when we opened the door behind it, we found nothing. Just a concrete wall, no stairs, no doors, no way forward, and the man who had brought us there looked confused. He asked me where we were. He asked me what day it was. I was alone then, truly alone, in a terrifying place where the laws of reality seemed to bend and twist. I tried to maintain my grip on sanity by documenting everything in a small notebook I found. I wrote down dates, times, descriptions of other guests. I wrote down my own name over and over again so I wouldn't forget it. But even this felt like a losing battle. I was losing myself in this motel, moment by moment, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. On what I think was the 4th day, I discovered something disturbing in the office. A stack of old photographs, hundreds of them, all black and white or faded color. They showed different people, different decades, all of them checking into the Sunset Pines Motel. Some wore clothes from the 50s. Some wore fashions from the 70s. Some looked like they were from just a few years ago. And in nearly every photograph, there was the same detail. The same front desk clerk, looking exactly the same as he did now, standing behind the counter with that distant expression in his eyes. The chilling realization hit me that I had never actually seen the clerk leave the motel. I had seen him disappear into the back, but I had never seen him walk away. I had never seen him become confused or lose his memory like the other guests. He seemed immune to whatever this place was doing to us. And that suggested something even more horrifying. He wasn't a victim. He was something else entirely. Something that belonged to the motel. Something that was part of its unsettling mechanism. I found the notebooks then. Journals left behind by previous guests. hidden in the empty drawers of rooms throughout the motel. Page after page of increasingly incoherent writings as people tried desperately to hold on to their minds and their memories before whatever this was consumed them completely. The dates on these journals span decades. Some were from the 1970s, some from the 1990s. The most recent one was dated just 6 months ago, and the final entry was a single sentence, written over and over again in increasingly frantic handwriting. I can't remember why I'm here. I can't remember why I'm here. I can't remember why I'm here. I realized with horror that I had become the newest entry in this nightmare timeline. My life before the motel was becoming increasingly hazy. I couldn't remember my job or my address. The face of my girlfriend, the one I had tried to call that first night, was becoming blurry in my mind. The motel was erasing me, piece by piece, and soon I would join the other vacant people wandering its hallways, smiling peacefully at nothing. But then something changed. My phone, the dead phone I had kept with me all this time, suddenly vibrated in my pocket. After days of being completely lifeless, it buzzed once. I pulled it out. The screen flickered to life. There was a single text message, sent from a number with no name, no identifier. It contained only an address, a location, coordinates to somewhere far away. I didn't understand how this was possible. I didn't understand what it meant, but I understood that it was my only chance. I ran for the front door. It opened. It actually opened, as if the motel had suddenly released its grip. I ran across the parking lot toward my car, my phone still in my hand, that mysterious address burning in my mind. I drove, not bothering to think about which direction, just following the instinct to get away from that place. Hours later, when I finally felt safe enough to slow down, I looked at the address again. It matched a location 3 states away. A different motel, this one with a name I didn't recognize. And I understood something chilling about my escape. The motel hadn't let me go. It had simply transferred me, marked me, given me a destination. And somewhere in my fragmented memories, I could feel the pull toward that location, a compulsion to go there, to check in again, to begin the cycle one more time. My phone, its battery is dying again. As I sit in this hotel room, hundreds of miles away, writing these words on my laptop, I'm terrified to let it fully drain. Because I know what will happen if it does. I know what's waiting for me. The question that haunts me now, the question that keeps me awake at night with my heart pounding in my chest, is whether I am actually free or whether I am still inside that motel, watching the desert through a window, wondering if any of this is real. I am watching my phone battery percentage decline, 75%, 50%, 25%, and I'm wondering if when it reaches 0, I'll wake up in a room at the Sunset Pines Motel, checking in for the first time all over again, the clerk looking at me with those distant, unblinking eyes, and I want to remember any of this. I want to remember the fear, the horror, the nightmare of being trapped in a place where time and memory itself are weapons. I want to remember anything except the terrible feeling that I've been here before. Story 3. When the GPS went blank. I should have known something was wrong when my phone died at 73% battery. I was driving through eastern Nevada, chasing a deadline for a construction job in Reno, when the screen just went black. No warning, no flickering. 1 second I was following the blue line on my GPS, and the next second I was staring at my own confused reflection in dead glass. I tapped it, shook it, nothing. The highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon thrown across endless desert, and I had no idea if I was still heading the right direction. That was 3 hours ago. The truly terrifying part was not that my phone died. It was what happened to every other piece of technology in my truck. The radio cut to static first, that awful white noise that makes your teeth hurt. Then my GPS unit, the one mounted to my dashboard, the expensive one I bought specifically because it did not need cell service, just blinked twice and displayed a screen full of scrambled characters. Not even an error message. Just symbols that looked almost like letters but were not quite right. Like something was trying to communicate through the machine but did not understand human language. I pulled over on the shoulder, hands shaking slightly, though I would not admit to myself why. The desert pressed in on both sides, all scrub brush and rust-colored rock formations that looked like bones pushing up through the earth. No other cars. I had not seen another vehicle in over an hour, which seemed impossible on a state highway, even one this remote. The silence outside my truck was oppressive, heavy, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I tried my phone again. Completely dead. I tried the GPS. Nothing. Even my truck, its built-in navigation system, the one that came with the vehicle, would not turn on. 3 separate devices, 3 separate failures, all within minutes of each other. The coincidence felt wrong, felt deliberate, like something had reached out and switched them all off with an invisible hand. That was when I noticed the mile marker. It said mile 186. I had been driving west, but 15 minutes earlier, when I had last checked, I passed mile 191. I was going backward somehow, or the markers were wrong, or I had gotten turned around without realizing it. The fear that had been sitting in my stomach like a cold stone suddenly spread through my chest. I was lost in a way that made no sense, in an area that felt deliberately hidden from the outside world. I got back in the truck and kept driving. What else could I do? The road curved through a series of low hills. And that was when I saw the town. It appeared suddenly, tucked into a valley I had not noticed approaching. One moment there was nothing but empty desert, and the next moment there were buildings, maybe 20 or 30 of them, clustered around a single main street. No signs indicating the town's name. No welcome marker, just structures that looked like they had been abandoned for decades. All warped wood and collapsed roofs and windows like dark, empty eye sockets. Except one building had lights on. A diner, or what used to be a diner, sitting at the edge of town. The neon sign was off, but warm yellow light glowed through the windows, and I could see movement inside. Shadows passing back and forth. People. Real. Living people. Relief flooded through me. I could ask for directions. Use their phone. Figure out where the hell I had ended up. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, noting there were no other vehicles, which struck me as strange but not impossible. Maybe everyone who worked there lived in town. Maybe I was overthinking everything because I was tired and frustrated and a little bit scared, though I still was not ready to use that word. The inside of the diner looked frozen in time, like something from the 1950s that had never been updated. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, a long counter with chrome stools. Everything was clean, immaculately clean, which somehow made it more unsettling. Abandoned places are supposed to be dirty, covered in dust and decay. This place looked like it had been waiting for customers. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged, wearing a waitress uniform that matched the retro aesthetic perfectly. She smiled at me, and that smile was the most horrifying thing I had seen yet, though I could not explain why. It was too wide, too friendly. Her eyes did not match the expression on her face. I asked if I could use her phone. My voice sounded strange in the quiet diner, too loud, echoing slightly. She told me they did not have a phone. Not anymore. The lines went down years ago, and nobody ever came to fix them. She said it casually, like it was perfectly normal, like being completely cut off from the outside world was just an inconvenience rather than an emergency. I asked where I was. What town was this? She paused before answering, and in that pause I heard something outside. A low, droning sound, like machinery running somewhere in the distance. Or maybe like humming. 1,000 voices humming the same note in perfect unison. The sound made my skin crawl, made something primitive in my brain scream at me to run. The woman said the town did not have a name anymore. Not one that people used. She asked if I wanted coffee, if I wanted to sit down, if I was hungry. Her voice had a strange quality to it. Slightly flat, like she was reading from a script she had memorized but did not fully understand. I backed toward the door, told her I needed to keep moving, needed to get to Reno, had a job waiting. The excuses tumbled out too quickly, revealing my fear, and I saw her smile widen even further. Impossibly further. Her mouth seemed too large for her face now. She said I could not leave. Not yet. The road only went one direction now, and it was not the direction I wanted to go. She said others had tried, and they always came back. The desert had a way of turning you around, of making sure you ended up exactly where you were supposed to be. I ran. I burst through the door and sprinted to my truck, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them in the gravel. The humming sound was louder now, coming from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in my bones. I grabbed the keys and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. The engine turned over immediately, thank God, and I floored the accelerator, spraying gravel as I fishtailed out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw the woman standing in the diner doorway, still smiling, watching me go with that terrible, empty expression. I drove faster than I should have on the winding road, desperate to put distance between myself and that disturbing place. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of blood orange and deep purple, and shadows stretched long and dark across the highway. I kept checking my mirrors, irrationally convinced I would see the woman following me somehow, walking down the center of the road with that nightmare smile. That was when I saw the mile marker again, mile 186, the exact same marker I had passed before stopping at the diner. I had been driving for at least 20 minutes, going as fast as I dared, and I was back where I started. The road had looped, or I had gotten turned around again, or something else was happening, something my rational mind refused to accept. I kept driving. The darkness came quickly, that sudden desert nightfall where daylight just vanishes. My headlights carved tunnels through the black, illuminating nothing but empty road and the creeping darkness on either side. The white lines flickered past in hypnotic rhythm. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, and I knew I needed to stop, needed to rest. But the thought of pulling over in this cursed place terrified me more than driving half-blind with exhaustion. Then my headlights caught something on the shoulder. A truck, exactly like mine, same make, same model, same color, same dent in the front bumper where I had backed into a pole 6 months ago. It was impossible. It was my truck. I was looking at my own vehicle parked on the side of the road, which meant I was still inside it, driving past myself, which made no sense at all. I stopped. I do not know why I stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, but I stopped. I got out and walked toward the other truck, my legs feeling numb and disconnected from my body. The door was unlocked. I opened it and looked inside, and that was when true horror washed over me like ice water. There was blood on the driver's seat, fresh blood, still wet, soaking into the fabric. And on the dashboard, scratched into the plastic with something sharp, were words, "Turn back while you still remember who you are." My own handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the way I formed the letters, the specific slant of my script. But I had not written this. I had never been here before. Unless I had been here many times. Unless I was trapped in something that was not quite a loop but was not quite linear time either. The humming started again, closer now, and I realized it was coming from the desert itself. The sand and rocks and twisted plants were all vibrating with that awful sound. The darkness between the scrub brush seemed to move, to ripple like water. And I saw shapes in that darkness. Figures that were almost human but not quite, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, watching with eyes that reflected light like an animal. I ran back to my truck, the real one, the one I had been driving, though I was no longer certain which truck was real and which was the echo. The engine started, and I drove, faster now, reckless, taking curves too sharp and feeling the tires lose traction on the pavement. Mile 186. Again, and again, and again. I passed it 7 times before the sun came up. 7 times I circled through that same stretch of cursed highway, seeing that same marker appear in my headlights like a taunt. On the 4th loop, I saw the diner again, still lit, and the woman was standing outside now, waving at me slowly. On the 6th loop, I saw more trucks on the shoulder, dozens of them, all identical to mine, all empty except for blood and scratched messages I could not read at highway speed. When dawn finally broke, gray and weak, everything changed at once. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, powered on by itself, full battery. The GPS unit flickered to life, showing my location clearly, Highway 50, Eastern Nevada, exactly where I should be. The radio crackled and then found a station, playing normal morning talk radio. The hosts laughing about sports scores and weather. I looked for the town. It was gone, just empty desert in every direction. I looked for the other trucks. Vanished. The mile markers were sequential now, counting up correctly as I drove west. Everything was normal again, perfectly normal, as if the last 8 hours had never happened. Except for one thing. On my passenger seat, there was a coffee cup from the diner. White ceramic with a chipped rim, still warm, and written on the bottom in marker, "See you next time." I made it to Reno, finished the job, drove home to Colorado on different highways, taking the long route, adding 6 hours to my trip to avoid that stretch of Nevada desert. I told myself it was road construction, weather, any excuse that made sense. But I know the truth. I know that somewhere out there, just past the edge of where the GPS signals reach, There is a place that should not exist. A place where the road loops back on itself and time does not move the right direction, and something terrible waits in the spaces between mile markers, collecting trucks and drivers and memories like trophies. I still have the coffee cup. I keep it in my garage, hidden in a box I never open. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that humming sound coming from inside the box. That same droning note that vibrated through the desert, that spoke of things older than highways and navigation systems and human understanding. And sometimes, when I am driving at night on any dark and empty road, I catch myself checking the mile markers obsessively, terrified I will see the numbers start counting backward. Because I know now that there are places in America where the GPS goes blank, where your phone dies, where the normal rules stop applying. Places that wait patiently for travelers who take the wrong turn, who drive a little too far into the emptiness, who find themselves in valleys that do not appear on any map. The truly horrifying part is not that these places exist. It is that they are waiting, patient and hungry and inevitable. And the woman, this last words keep echoing in my memory. A promise and a threat. See you next time. Because there will be a next time. I can feel it. The road is calling me back. Story 4. Gas station past signal range. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened on Route 89. There are places in America where your phone becomes nothing more than a brick of glass and metal. Places where the last bar of service flickers out like a dying heartbeat, and you realize just how alone you really are. I found one of those places 3 months ago, and I need you to believe me when I say that some dead zones are dead for a reason. My name is Marcus, and I used to drive freight across the southwestern states. 42 years old, divorced, no kids, just me and whatever cargo needed moving from point A to point B. I had driven Route 89 through Nevada dozens of times. Empty highway cutting through nothing but desert and darkness. The kind of road where you can go an hour without seeing another car. Where the night presses against your windows like something alive and hungry. It was October when everything changed. I was hauling electronics from Reno to Flagstaff, running behind schedule because of a blown tire outside of Tonopah. The sun had dropped below the horizon 2 hours earlier, and my phone had been searching for signal for the last 40 miles. Just that endless spinning wheel, that helpless icon that tells you civilization has forgotten you exist. The gas gauge was hovering near empty when I saw the lights. Not the warm glow of a town, but the harsh fluorescent glare of a single gas station, standing alone in the desert like a lighthouse in an ocean of sand and scrub brush. The sign read, "Last Chance Fuel," in letters that flickered and buzzed with electrical interference. Something about it felt wrong immediately. The way it sat there, too isolated, too perfectly placed right when I needed it most. But empty tank beats bad feelings every time. I pulled off the highway onto a gravel access road, my headlights cutting through dust that seemed thicker than it should be, almost like smoke. The station itself looked like it had been pulled from a different decade. Single pump out front, small building with barred windows, and a dying neon sign that cast everything in shades of sickly green and red. There was one other vehicle there, a white sedan, Nevada plates, parked at an odd angle near the building. Its driver, his door hung open, and the interior light was on, but I could not see anyone inside. The sight of it made my skin crawl in a way I could not explain. Something about an abandoned car with its door open in the middle of nowhere triggers something primal in the human brain. A warning that something went terribly wrong. I killed my engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the wind howling across the empty desert. My phone was still useless, still searching for a signal that would never come. I was past signal range now, truly and completely isolated. The gas station door was propped open with a cinder block, and I could see harsh fluorescent lights spilling out onto the cracked concrete. I pumped my gas first, watching the numbers climb on the ancient mechanical counter. The air smelled strange out there, not just desert and gasoline, but something else. Something organic and rotting, like meat left too long in the sun. When I went inside to pay, the strangeness intensified. The place was a time capsule from the 1980s. Wood-paneled walls, linoleum floor stained and cracked, shelves stocked with products I had not seen in years. But everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, like no one had touched anything in months. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sound that set my teeth on edge, flickering in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. The clerk behind the counter was a thin man in his 60s, wearing a uniform that might have once been blue but had faded to a gray that matched his skin. His name tag said, Earl, in peeling letters. He did not look up when I entered. He was staring at something on a small television behind the counter, but the screen showed only static, that endless gray-white snow that used to fill dead channels. "Pump 3, I said, setting 220s on the counter. "Earl." His head turned toward me with mechanical slowness, and when his eyes met mine, I felt ice water flood my veins. His pupils were dilated so wide they looked black, and he was not blinking. Not at all, just staring with those horrible wide eyes. "You should not have stopped here," he said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from somewhere deep underground. "Cell service ended for a reason. This place is past signal range. Past where help can reach." I laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, well, empty tank does not care about cell service. Just need to pay and get back on the road." He did not move to take my money. He just kept staring with those unblinking eyes. Behind him, the television static seemed to be forming patterns, shapes that almost looked like faces pressed against glass, mouths open in silent screams. "The others tried to leave," Earl whispered, "but the road only goes in circles out here. Once you stop, once you turn off that highway, you are part of it now. Part of the station. We are all part of the station." My heart was hammering now, that primal fear response kicking into overdrive. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this place. I backed toward the door, leaving the money on the counter. "Keep the change," I muttered, desperate to get back to my truck. "You will see," Earl called after me, still not moving, still not blinking. "You will see what happens to those who stop where they should not stop. Where signal cannot reach. Where nobody can hear you scream into the darkness." I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into gear, spraying gravel as I accelerated back toward the highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see Earl standing in the doorway of the station, just a silhouette against the harsh light. Not moving, just watching me go. But that is when I noticed it. The white sedan was gone, the one with the open door and the interior light on. It had completely disappeared in the 10 minutes I was inside. I hit the highway and pushed the accelerator down, desperate to put distance between myself and that horrible place. But after 20 minutes of driving, something impossible happened. I saw lights ahead, harsh fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness. The same gas station, the same flickering sign reading, "Last Chance Fuel." I had been driving in a straight line. I had not turned around. I had not exited. But somehow, impossibly, I was back at the station. And sitting there, parked at an odd angle near the building, was my own truck. Driver, his door hanging open. Interior light on. Empty. That is when the real terror began. That is when I understood what Earl meant about the road going in circles. About being past signal range. Past where help could reach. I am still here, driving these same 20 miles over and over. Each time I pass the station, I see more vehicles. A white sedan. My truck. Others now too. All parked at strange angles. All with doors open and lights on. All empty. My phone has been dead for weeks. The gas gauge never moves. The night never ends. I am trapped in this loop. This nightmare stretch of highway that exists somewhere past signal range. Past help. Past hope. And every time I complete the circuit, every time I see that gas station appear in my headlights again, Earl is standing in the doorway, watching, waiting for the moment when I finally give up and stop. Because he knows what I know now. What everyone who stops here eventually learns. There is no escape. There is only the endless drive, the circling, and the slow realization that you are already gone. Already one of the missing. Another unsolved disappearance on a lonely highway that nobody travels anymore. Sometimes, late in this eternal night, I catch glimpses of the others. Faces pressed against car windows, hands clawing at glass, mouths open in silent screams. They are trapped in their own vehicles, their own loops, their own private hells carved out of this cursed stretch of desert road. And the most terrifying part, I am starting to forget my name, my life, everything that came before this highway. Soon I will be like Earl, just another ghost manning the station, warning the next poor soul who runs out of gas and makes the fatal mistake of stopping at the Last Chance Fuel. The gas station past signal range, the place where help cannot reach, the place where the road only goes in circles, forever and ever, in the darkness that never lifts. If you are ever driving through Nevada, and your cell service cuts out, and you see a lone gas station glowing in the desert night, do not stop. Do not stop no matter how empty your tank runs. Keep driving until you see civilization again. Because some places exist outside the normal world. Some places are hungry. And once they have you, once you are past signal range, nobody is coming to save you. Nobody even knows you are gone. Story 5. Forest that blocks everything. I should have known something was wrong when my phone died at full battery. Not died like it ran out of power. Died like someone reached inside it and switched off every circuit. The screen went black mid-sentence while I was texting my wife. And when I looked up from the steering wheel, the GPS was gone too. Just a blank rectangle where the map used to be. My truck was still rolling down that narrow logging road in northern Montana. But suddenly I had no idea where I was going. That was 3 hours ago. Or maybe 5. Without my phone, I honestly could not tell you. The forest out here does not care about you. It swallows you whole and makes you disappear. I learned that the hard way when I took this shortcut through the Bitterroot Range, trying to save time on my way to Missoula. The main highway had been closed due to a rock slide, and some guy at a gas station told me about this old access road that would cut 40 miles off my trip. He drew it on a paper map with a shaky hand, and I stupidly trusted him. Now I was deep in the woods, surrounded by trees so tall and thick they blocked out most of the sky. The road had turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt, and I had not seen another vehicle or person in over an hour. The silence was the worst part. In Montana, you expect to hear birds, wind, maybe the distant sound of a creek. But here, there was nothing, just the low rumble of my engine and the crunch of tires on dead leaves. My truck rounded a bend, and I saw it, a small wooden sign, half rotted and leaning to one side, nailed to a tree. Hand-painted letters, barely visible. No signal beyond this point. I laughed, a dry, nervous laugh. No signal. That explained the phone, but it did not explain the fear creeping up my spine like cold fingers. I kept driving. What else could I do? Turn back? I had been on this road for miles, and the idea of backtracking through that eerie silence felt worse than pushing forward. Besides, the map said this road would eventually connect to Highway 12. I just had to keep going. The trees pressed closer. Their branches reached over the road like skeletal arms, creating a tunnel of shadow. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, even though it was only late afternoon. I checked my watch, 3:15, but it felt like dusk. That was when I noticed the time on my watch had stopped. The second hand was frozen between the 4 and 5. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I held it to my ear. No ticking. A $1,500 automatic watch, dead as a stone. My heart started hammering. Something was very wrong here. The road curved again, and I saw the first car. A rusted-out sedan from the 80s, sitting in the ditch with its windows shattered and moss growing through the wheel wells. Then another car, 50 yards ahead. A pickup truck on its side, doors hanging open like broken wings. Then a third, a fourth, vehicles scattered along the roadside. All of them ancient and destroyed. All of them abandoned. I slowed down, my hands tight on the wheel. What the hell was this place? The forest grew darker. The trees were so dense now that almost no light reached the ground. I turned on my high beams, and that was when I saw her. A woman standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, and my truck skidded to a stop maybe 10 feet from her. My heart was in my throat, adrenaline screaming through my veins. She did not move. She just stood there, facing me, her arms hanging at her sides. She was maybe 30 years old, wearing a dirty white dress that looked like it had not been washed in months. Her hair was long and tangled, covering most of her face. Her feet were bare, caked in mud. She did not blink, did not react to my headlights at all. I sat there, engine idling, staring at her. Every instinct told me to reverse and get out of there, but I could not look away. There was something horribly wrong about the way she stood. Too still, too perfect, like a mannequin. Then she tilted her head, just a little, and I saw her eyes through the curtain of hair. They were black, completely black. No whites, no irises, just 2 empty holes in her skull. I threw the truck into reverse and floored it. The tires spun, kicking up dirt, and I shot backward down the road. I did not take my eyes off her. She did not chase me. She just stood there, watching me go with those horrifying eyes, her head still tilted at that unnatural angle. I reversed around the bend until I could not see her anymore. Then I spun the truck around and faced forward again. My chest was heaving. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. I needed to get out of here. Now, I hit the gas and tore down the road, faster than I should have on loose dirt. The trees blurred past. More abandoned cars appeared in the ditch. Dozens of them now, stretching back into the forest like a graveyard of metal and rust. How many people had driven down this road and never made it out? The road forked ahead, two paths, both swallowed by darkness. No signs, no markers. I had no idea which way led to safety. I chose left and prayed. The forest changed. The trees were different here, twisted and gnarled, their bark black as charcoal. The ground was covered in a thick layer of dead leaves that muffled every sound. My engine seemed quieter. My breathing seemed quieter. Everything felt muted, like the world was wrapped in cotton. Then I started hearing it. A sound, low and rhythmic, like breathing, but not human breathing. Something deeper, slower. It came from everywhere and nowhere, pulsing through the trees like a heartbeat. I rolled up my windows, locked the doors. It did not help. The sound seeped through anyway, vibrating in my bones. The road narrowed. Branches scraped against the sides of my truck, screeching like nails on a chalkboard. I kept going. I had no choice. Another fork, another blind decision. Right this time, the breathing grew louder. I saw something moving in the trees. Just a flicker of motion, too fast to identify. Then another movement on the other side. Shadows darting between the trunks, keeping pace with my truck. I accelerated, but they kept up effortlessly. Then one of them stepped into the road. Not a woman this time. Something else. Tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places. Its skin was pale gray, stretched tight over jutting bones. It had no face, just smooth skin where a face should be. I swerved around it, nearly losing control, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, it was gone. But there were more now. Dozens of them, standing in the trees on both sides of the road, perfectly still, watching me pass. They did not move, did not follow. They just watched with their faceless heads turned toward me. My truck hit something, a pothole or a root, I could not tell. The steering wheel jerked in my hands, and I heard a horrible crunching sound from under the chassis. The engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered. No. The truck lurched forward another 100 yards, then died. Just stopped, right there in the middle of the road, surrounded by those things in the trees. I turned the key. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. The engine would not even turn over. I was trapped. The breathing sound was so loud now it felt like it was inside my head. I could feel it in my teeth, in my chest, pulsing with the rhythm of something alive and massive and ancient. I looked out the window. The faceless things were closer now. Still not moving, but closer. Like they had teleported. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, forming a circle around my truck. Then I heard the tapping. Soft at first, fingertips on glass. I looked at the passenger window. One of them was right there, its hand pressed against the glass, its blank face inches from the window. I could see every detail of its skin, pale and waxy like a corpse. More tapping, all around the truck. They were surrounding me, pressing their hands against the windows, the hood, the roof. The metal groaned under their weight. I grabbed my hunting knife from the glove box. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. What was I going to do with a knife against these things? But it was all I had. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then, all at once, they stepped back. Every single one of them moved away from the truck in perfect unison, retreating into the trees. In seconds, they were gone. Vanished into the shadows like they had never been there. I sat there, knife in hand, barely breathing, waiting for whatever was coming next. That was when I saw the light, a soft orange glow, filtering through the trees ahead. Firelight. My brain screamed at me that it was a trap, but my body was already moving. I shoved open the door and ran toward the light, leaving my dead truck behind. The forest tried to stop me. Branches grabbed at my clothes. Roots seemed to rise up to trip me, but I kept running, crashing through the undergrowth, following that light like a drowning man swimming toward the surface. I burst into a clearing. There was a cabin, small, old, made of dark wood with a stone chimney. Smoke curled from the top. A single window glowed with warm light. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. Or a nightmare. I did not care. I ran to the door and pounded on it with my fist. The door opened. An old man stood there, holding a lantern. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Gray beard, weathered face, flannel shirt. Normal. Human. He stepped aside without a word and let me in. The cabin was one room. A bed in the corner, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs. Everything was neat and simple. The old man closed the door behind me and locked it with 3 separate bolts. I stood there, gasping, my whole body shaking. He walked to the stove and poured something from a pot into a tin cup. Handed it to me. I drank without asking what it was. Hot, bitter tea. You should not be here, he said finally. His voice was rough, like he had not spoken in years. I did not mean to be. I managed. My phone died. I got lost. There were things out there. I know what is out there. He sat down at the table and gestured for me to do the same. I collapsed into the chair. How long have you been here? I asked. He smiled, a sad, broken smile. I stopped counting. What is this place? The forest that blocks everything. He stared into his own cup. Phones do not work here. Watches stop. Time moves differently. People who come in rarely go out. Why? Because the forest is alive. And it is hungry. I wanted to call him crazy. But I had seen those things. I had heard that breathing. I knew he was telling the truth. How do I get out? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a wooden chest in the corner. He opened it and pulled out a compass. Old brass, tarnished and dented. This will point you to the edge, he said, handing it to me. But you have to leave now. Before full dark, once night comes, nothing will save you. I looked out the window. The light was already fading. What about you? I am already dead, he said simply. I just have not stopped moving yet. He walked me to the door and opened it. The forest was waiting. Follow the compass. Do not look at them. Do not stop. And whatever you hear, do not answer. I nodded, clutching the compass, and stepped outside. The old man closed the door behind me. I heard the bolt slide into place. I looked at the compass. The needle was pointing west. I started walking. The forest was alive with movement now. Shadows everywhere. The faceless things followed me, but they stayed back, just out of reach. I kept my eyes on the compass and walked faster. Something called my name, my wife, his voice. I kept walking. Something touched my shoulder. I kept walking. The breathing sound returned, so loud it was deafening. I kept walking. The compass needle started spinning wildly. Then it stopped, pointing straight ahead. I saw headlights, real headlights, on a real road. Highway 12. I ran. I ran until I burst out of the tree line and collapsed on the asphalt. A semi-truck blared its horn and swerved around me. I lay there, gasping, staring up at the normal sky, the real sky, feeling my phone buzz in my pocket. It was back on. 57 missed calls from my wife. I looked back at the forest. It was just trees, normal trees, but deep in the shadows. I could see them standing there. Watching, I got up and started walking down the highway. I did not look back again. That was 6 months ago. I never told my wife what really happened. I told her I got lost and my phone died. She believed me, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that breathing. And I know, eventually, I am going to have to go back. Because I still have the old man, this compass, and the needle will not stop pointing back toward the forest. Story 6. Silence Protocol. Have you ever noticed how terrifying silence can be when it is not supposed to be there? When the world should be buzzing with connection, with voices and data flowing invisibly through the air, and instead there is nothing but a void where technology used to live? I discovered something in a small Montana town that still keeps me awake at night. Something about what happens when the signal dies and the people who live in that darkness stop being entirely human. The drive to Ashford was supposed to take 6 hours. I was heading there to appraise an estate, part of my job as a freelance antiques buyer. The deceased owner had reportedly collected rare books and vintage items, and the family wanted everything evaluated and sold. Easy money, a few days in a quiet mountain town, then home. I should have known something was wrong when my GPS started glitching 50 miles outside of Ashford. The screen flickered, the route recalculated over and over, and then it just froze. The little blue dot representing my car sat motionless on a gray void. I tried restarting my phone. Nothing changed. No big deal. I had driven through dead zones before. Mountain towns are notorious for spotty coverage. I would just follow the highway signs until I reached Ashford. The sun was setting when I finally saw the town appear in the valley below. It looked normal enough. Small, maybe 2,000 people. A main street with shops and a diner, houses scattered on the hillsides, a church steeple rising above it all. Lights were on in windows. Street lamps glowed orange in the gathering dusk. But my phone still showed no signal. Not one bar, just that hollow, unsettling emptiness where the carrier information should be. I pulled into town just after 8. The main street was quiet but not abandoned. A few people walked along the sidewalks. The diner had customers visible through its windows. Everything looked normal, except it was not. I parked in front of a small motel called the Timberline Inn and checked my phone again. Still nothing. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat and tried to find Wi-Fi. My computer could not detect a single network. Not one. In a town of 2,000 people, there was not a single Wi-Fi signal broadcasting. That was when the creepy feeling started. That unsettling whisper in the back of my mind that something here was deeply wrong. I went into the motel office. An older woman sat behind the desk, reading a paperback novel by lamplight. She looked up and smiled, but there was something strange about her expression. Too calm, too practiced. I asked for a room. She nodded and pulled out a handwritten ledger, the kind I had not seen used in decades. No computer, no credit card machine, just pen and paper. I mentioned that my phone was not working and asked if the town had any cell service. Her smile did not change. She told me that phones do not work in Ashford after midnight. Never have. It was just something about the mountains and the way the valley sat. Interference or something technical she did not understand. But everyone in town knew. It was normal. The way she said it, so casual and matter-of-fact, made my skin crawl. Phones do not work after midnight. Like it was a weather pattern. Like it was scheduled. I asked what she meant. Phones should work all the time or not at all. How could they just stop working at a specific hour? Her smile tightened slightly. She said I would see. Then she handed me a key, an actual metal key on a plastic tag, and told me my room was upstairs, second door on the left. I took the key and left, my unease growing with every step. The room was clean but dated, decorated like it had not been updated since 1995. Floral wallpaper, a chunky television with a built-in VCR, a rotary phone on the nightstand. I sat on the bed and checked my cell phone again. Still no signal, but it was only 8:30. The woman had said after midnight. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was some strange atmospheric phenomenon in the valley. Maybe the mountains created interference that got worse at night. It was unusual, sure, but not impossible. But the way the locals acted, that disturbing calmness, that acceptance, that was what scared me. I left the motel and walked down the main street, looking for answers. The diner was still open, so I went inside. A handful of people sat in booths, eating in near silence. A waitress leaned against the counter, staring out the window with an expression that can only be described as waiting. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. The waitress brought it without a word. I asked her about the cell service. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:15. She told me I had a few hours left. I should make any calls I needed to make now. After midnight, the silence started, and it lasted until dawn. The silence. That was the word she used. Not dead zone, not outage, the silence. I asked what happened at midnight. Why the phone stopped working. She looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Pity mixed with something darker. Something like fear that had been buried so deep it barely registered anymore. She said the town made a deal a long time ago. Before she was born. Before most people in Ashford were born. The mountains gave them something, and in return, the mountains took something back. Every night, like clockwork, I felt a chill run down my spine. That sounded insane. Superstitious nonsense from an isolated town that had spent too long away from the modern world. But the way she said it, the certainty, the resignation, I asked what the mountains took. She just shook her head and walked away. I sat there, staring at my coffee, feeling the weight of something horrible pressing down on me. The other customers did not look at me. They ate in silence, faces blank, like they were going through motions they had repeated 1,000 times. I paid and left. Outside, the street was darker. Fewer people around. The ones I did see moved quickly, purposefully, heading toward homes and closing doors behind them. I checked my phone. 10:45. Still had signal. 2 bars. I called my wife. She answered on the second ring, and just hearing her voice made me feel safer. I told her I had made it to Ashford, that the town was weird, that I would be home in a few days. Normal conversation. Comforting. Real. But as we talked, I watched the signal bars on my phone. At 11:30, I had 2 bars. At 11:45, 1 bar. At 11:50, the signal flickered. I told my wife I loved her and ended the call. At exactly midnight, my phone went dead. Not low battery, not no signal, completely dead. The screen went black. It would not turn on. I pressed the power button over and over. Nothing. And that was when I heard it. The silence. It was not just the absence of sound. It was deeper than that. Heavier, like something had been removed from the world, leaving a void that pressed against my ears and made my chest feel tight. No distant hum of traffic. No wind. No insects. Nothing. The street lamps stayed on. The lights in buildings stayed on. But the world had gone utterly, horrifyingly quiet. I stood there on the empty main street, heart pounding, and realized I could not even hear my own footsteps. The sound was swallowed, muted, like the air itself had become thick and dead. I ran back to the motel. My footfalls made no noise. My breathing made no noise. It was like moving through a nightmare where the rules of reality had been suspended. I burst into my room and slammed the door. I tried my phone again. Dead. Tried the laptop. It turned on but would not connect to anything. The rotary phone on the nightstand had no dial tone. I was completely cut off, isolated, alone in a town that had warned me this would happen and accepted it as normal. I sat on the bed, pulse racing, and tried to think. Okay, the phones died at midnight. They would come back at dawn. The waitress had said so. I just had to wait it out. A few hours. That was all. But the silence, that crushing, unnatural silence. I turned on the television, desperate for noise, for anything to break the void. Static. I flipped through channels. More static. Then, on channel 7, an image appeared. It was a camera feed. Black and white, showing the main street of Ashford. Empty. The timestamp in the corner read 12:17 a.m. I watched, not understanding what I was seeing. Then a figure walked into frame. A person, moving slowly down the center of the street. They stopped directly under a street lamp and looked up. Straight at the camera. Straight at me. I could not see their face clearly through the grainy footage, but I could see their posture. Rigid. Wrong. Like someone imitating the way a human stands but getting the details slightly off. Then another figure appeared, and another. They came from side streets and from between buildings, all moving with that same disturbing, mechanical gait. Within minutes, dozens of them filled the street. Standing. Waiting. For what? I turned off the television. My hands were shaking. This was insane. This was not real. Towns do not make deals with mountains. People do not stop making sound. Technology does not die on a schedule. But I had seen it. I was living it. I went to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. The street below was empty. No figures. No movement. Just that terrible, oppressive silence. Then I saw one, standing in the shadows across the street. Watching my window, I let the curtain fall and backed away. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. The figure had not moved. Had not reacted. Just stood there in the darkness, waiting. Hours passed. I sat on the bed, staring at the door, listening to the silence. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the sound of my phone buzzing. I grabbed it. The screen was on. Signal restored. The time read 6:03 a.m. I looked out the window. The street was bright with early morning sun. Normal. Empty except for a man walking his dog. I packed my things in minutes and checked out. The same woman was at the desk, looking exactly as she had the night before. I told her I was leaving early, that the estate appraisal could wait. She nodded. She did not seem surprised. As I loaded my car, a man approached me. Middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He had the same too calm expression everyone in this town wore. He told me I was smart to lead. Most people who came to Ashford and experienced the silence left as quickly as they could. But some stayed. Some got curious. They went out during the silence to see what was really happening. Those people, he said, never left. He glanced toward the mountains surrounding the valley. He told me the town had made a deal generations ago. In exchange for prosperity, for safety, for isolation from the outside world, they gave the mountains their voices. Every night from midnight to dawn, the town belonged to something else. Something that lived in the silence. The people who went outside during those hours, who tried to understand or interfere, became part of it. They walked the streets with the others, waiting, watching, never speaking, never leaving. I asked him why he was telling me this, why anyone would stay in a place like this. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He said they did not have a choice. Once you understood the deal, once you really saw what happened in the silence, the mountains would not let you go. You either accepted it and stayed, or you resisted and became something else. Then he wished me a safe drive and walked away. I got in my car and drove out of Ashford as fast as I legally could. I did not stop until I was 100 miles away and my phone showed full signal. I never went back. I turned down the estate job and told the family to find someone else. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will glitch. The signal will drop for just a moment. And in that brief, horrifying silence, I wonder if the mountains are reaching for me. If the deal extends beyond Ashford. If the silence is spreading. Because here's the truly terrifying thing. I have started noticing other towns. Small places in valleys, surrounded by mountains or forests. Places where people talk about the cell service being unreliable at night. Where locals shrug it off as normal. I wonder how many deals have been made. How many towns have given up their voices for something they thought was worth it? And I wonder what happens when the silence finally reaches everywhere. When there is nowhere left to run. When midnight comes and the world goes quiet and we realize too late that we traded our connection for something we should never have accepted. The mountains are patient. The silence is spreading. And sooner or later, it is going to swallow us all. Story 7. Call that never connected. My sister stopped answering her phone 3 minutes after she told me where she was going. And that is when I knew something terrifying was about to happen. Not the kind of scary you think about in the abstract, but the real, cold fear that grabs your chest and wants to let go. The kind that makes you understand, with complete certainty, that danger is already here and closing in fast. It was a Sunday afternoon in October when she called me from her car on Highway 101, heading north through the redwood forests of Northern California. She had taken the scenic route, the one nobody takes anymore, because she wanted time to think. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in months. She was laughing about something. She told me she was about an hour from her destination, a cabin rental in a small town called Millbrook, population 800 and falling. She promised to call me when she arrived. I told her to drive safe. Normal things, the kind of conversation you never think will matter, the kind that will haunt you forever. 3 minutes after we hung up, I tried calling her back. She had forgotten to tell me the Wi-Fi password for the cabin, and I wanted to send it to her before she lost cell service in the mountains. The call went straight to the network unavailable message. I tried again. Same result. That is when the first seed of worry planted itself in my mind. Service can drop in those forest areas. It happens all the time. I told myself not to worry, but something in my gut was already screaming that this was different, that something creepy and unsettling was happening, and I was too far away to stop it. I waited 20 minutes and tried again. Still nothing. The fear was growing now, a slow burn that made my hands shake as I held my phone. I called the cabin rental company. The woman who answered had a confused voice when I explained the situation. She told me the cabin was isolated. Yes, but the owner usually got decent cell service on the property itself. She suggested I wait for my sister to check in. I was being paranoid. That is what I told myself. That is what I wanted to believe. An hour passed. No call from my sister. 2 hours. The fear was becoming something heavier, something that pressed down on my chest and made every breath difficult. I called the local police in Millbrook. A tired officer told me it was too early to file a missing person report. She had only been out of contact for a couple hours. People lose signal all the time. That word kept coming up. Time. As if time was still moving normally, as if the world was still operating under the rules I understood. But I could feel those rules breaking down. I tried reaching her friends, her work colleagues, anyone who might know where she was going or who might have information. Nobody had details. Nobody seemed to think this was as urgent as I did. The terrifying reality of my situation was becoming clear to me. I was trapped in a nightmare scenario that nobody else could see. I was the only one who understood that something horrifying had happened, something that had removed my sister from the world completely. By evening, I was driving north myself. I had packed a bag, told my boss I was sick, and pointed my car toward those redwood forests. The drive was surreal. Every exit sign, every mile marker felt like I was descending deeper into something dark and unknown. The sun was setting, turning the sky shades of orange and purple that should have been beautiful but instead felt like a warning. The eerie atmosphere of the forest grew stronger the farther I drove. Trees towered above the highway like silent witnesses to something terrible. The darkness was settling in, and with it came a growing sense of dread. I reached Millbrook around midnight. The town was like something from a horror movie, the kind of small place where nothing good ever happened and everyone knew it without saying it out loud. Shuttered storefronts, a gas station with flickering lights, houses dark and closed off. The cabin was 3 miles outside of town, accessed by a winding road that got worse the further I went. Gravel turned to dirt, the trees pressed in closer. My headlights seemed almost useless against the darkness. The cabin was small and dark when I arrived. No lights on. My sister's car was in the driveway. My heart started pounding in my chest. She was here, or at least her car was here. I grabbed a flashlight from my trunk and approached the front door. The unsettling feeling was overwhelming now. The air felt cold, colder than it should have been for October. The darkness seemed to have weight to it, pressing down from the trees in the sky. I could hear the forest sounds, which should have been natural, but felt eerie and disturbing. Rustling, creaking, something that might have been breathing. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and called out her name. My voice sounded small and fragile in that empty space. There was no response. I turned on every light in the cabin, desperate to push back the shadows that felt like they were trying to consume me. The cabin was empty. No signs of struggle. No indication of where she had gone. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her phone was nowhere to be found. I found a notepad near the phone and saw something that made my blood freeze. My sister had written down her phone number, along with the words, "Signal drops here." And beneath that, she had drawn an arrow pointing toward the back of the cabin, toward the forest. I didn't remember her mentioning anything about exploring the woods. Why would she have written that down? What was she trying to tell me? The back door of the cabin opened onto a small patio and a trail that led into the forest. I stood there for a long moment, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The rational part of my mind was screaming at me to call the police, to wait for daylight, to not walk into those woods alone at night. But the part of me that was desperate to find my sister was louder. I stepped onto the trail and began walking. The forest at night is a terrifying place. Not because of what is in it, necessarily, but because of what you can see. Every sound seemed significant. Every shadow could be hiding something. My flashlight beam moved across twisted trees and thick undergrowth. The trail was barely visible, more of a suggestion of a path than an actual walkway. I moved slowly, calling out my sister, just name every few steps, getting no response except the sound of my own voice returning to me from the darkness. After maybe 10 minutes of walking, I came upon something that made me stop completely. A clearing, maybe 50 yards across, and in the center of it was a structure. Not a house or a cabin, but something else. The building was old, maybe from the 1950s or 60s, made of concrete and metal that was now badly rusted. There were no windows, just a heavy metal door with a rusted lock. And there was a dead animal in front of the door, a deer, bloated and rotting. The smell hit me and I had to turn away, gagging. This place was horrifying in a way that went beyond what I could immediately understand. There was something deeply wrong about this building, about this clearing. The darkness around it seemed thicker, as if the light from my flashlight couldn't penetrate it properly. I felt watched. I felt like something was aware of me being here, something that didn't want me here. The fear was becoming paralyzing. Every instinct was telling me to run, to get back to the cabin, to get in my car and drive away as fast as I could. I pulled out my phone to call the police. No signal. I tried anyway, hoping for emergency services to somehow connect. The phone just showed the dreaded words. No service. That was when I saw something that stopped my breath. A jacket hanging from a tree branch near the clearing. My sister. This jacket. The green one she had been wearing in the photo she had texted me before she left. I grabbed it with shaking hands. It was still damp, as if it had been recently removed. The fear was absolute now. The kind of fear that makes you question whether you were going to survive the next few hours. I ran back toward the cabin, not caring about the trail, just crashing through brush and low branches. I had to get out of those woods. I had to get to somewhere with signal and call for help. Behind me, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. It sounded like footsteps, but the rhythm was wrong. Not the sound of a person running, but something else. Something that moved in a way that didn't match anything natural. I burst out of the forest and ran for my car. I didn't even look back at the cabin. I started the engine and drove, faster than was safe on that dark gravel road, not caring if I hit something or crashed. I just needed to get away from that place. When I finally hit the highway and saw the first signs of civilization, I pulled over and tried my phone again. Signal. 1 bar. I called the police with shaking hands and reported everything. Missing sister. Strange building in the forest. Dead animal. The jacket. The response was almost immediately chilling. A female dispatcher asked me to describe the building I found. When I did, she went silent for a long moment. Then she told me that building had been part of a logging operation that shut down in the 1970s. But there was something else, something she seemed reluctant to tell me. There had been disappearances in that area, several of them over the years. People who had gone missing in those woods and were never found. At least 3 that they knew about. Maybe more. By dawn, the police had found my sister's car at the cabin. They had sent search teams into the forest, but they came back empty-handed. The building was locked tight, and when they forced it open, they found it was completely empty. No signs of anything, Just concrete walls and a concrete floor, stained with something dark that might have been rust or might have been something far more disturbing. No remains, no evidence, just emptiness. The search continued for weeks. They brought in specialized teams. They searched the surrounding forest with dogs and helicopters. Nothing. My sister vanished completely, as if the forest had simply opened up and swallowed her, erasing all trace of her existence. The only thing they ever found was a piece of her clothing caught on a branch, about a quarter mile deeper into the woods than where I had been that night. But here is the part that will never leave me. The part that makes me understand something horrifying is still happening. 3 months after my sister disappeared, I received a text message from her phone number. The message contained just an image, a photograph taken from inside that concrete building. And in the photograph, visible in the darkness, was what looked like shapes. Figures, dozens of them, standing and waiting, all facing toward the camera, all facing toward the door. I took the phone to the police. They tried to trace where the message came from. The signal pinged from a tower near Millbrook, but they could find no evidence of the phone ever being active again after my sister disappeared. They told me it was likely a hacker, someone playing a cruel prank. They told me to stop looking for rational explanations in the forest, to accept that my sister was probably dead and to move on with my life. But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the text message had arrived, how my sister's phone had never been found, how it suddenly had signal again just long enough to send that one terrifying image. I couldn't stop thinking about the building in the forest and those figures in the darkness. And I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if I had gone deeper into those woods that night, if I had been more courageous or more foolish, if I had found that building sooner. Last week, I received another message. This time it was a video, taken at night, shaky and unclear, like it was being filmed on an old phone. It showed the interior of that building, and it showed my sister. She was standing there, motionless, along with all those other figures. And there was someone moving through them, someone I couldn't quite see, touching each person gently on the shoulder. When they touched my sister, she looked directly at the camera and opened her mouth as if to speak. The video ended there. No audio, no explanation. Just that image of my sister, alive but not alive, aware but not aware, standing in that terrifying darkness with all the others. I went to the police again. They said the video was fake, a deep fake, a cruel hoax designed to torment me. They said I needed to seek professional help to process my grief. But I know better. I know that my sister is still in that building, still standing in that darkness, still waiting for something. And I know that something is still taking people, because last month, a woman went missing near that same forest. The month before, a young couple vanished from a hiking trail nearby. The news reports say they probably lost, that search and rescue teams are being deployed. But I know what is really happening. I know they being taken to that building to stand with my sister and all the others. And the most chilling part, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that I can feel it now. The presence, the thing in the forest. It is not satisfied with just taking my sister and the others. It wants me too. Every night since I received that last video, my phone has been ringing. But when I answer, there is only silence on the other end. And the caller ID shows my sister's number. The call that never connects, but never stops coming. The signal that vanishes when I need it most, only to return when the darkness arrives. I am writing this knowing what is coming. I can feel it circling closer. The fear that gripped me that night in the forest has never left. It lives in my chest now, a constant companion. And somewhere deep in those redwood forests, in that concrete building surrounded by darkness, my sister is waiting. Waiting for me to finally answer that call. Story 8. Offline somewhere between cities. The last text message I sent was to my wife at 9:47 p.m., telling her I would be home in 2 hours. That was 4 days ago. I know how insane that sounds. I know you are thinking I lost track of time, that I am confused, that there is some rational explanation for what happened to me on Interstate 40 between Amarillo and Albuquerque. But I am telling you the truth, the terrifying truth that nobody wants to hear because it means the world works differently than we thought. It means there are spaces between cities where the normal rules do not apply, where time stretches and bends and breaks, and where something is waiting in the darkness for travelers who venture too far into the empty places. Let me start at the beginning, before the fears set in, before I understood the danger I was in. I am a sales representative for industrial equipment, which means I spend half my life driving across the American Southwest, hitting small towns and distribution centers that most people have never heard of. The work is boring, but it pays well, and after 23 years of marriage and 2 kids in college, boring and well-paying is exactly what I need. I know every truck stop, every cheap motel, every shortcut between cities. Or at least I thought I did. That night I was driving through the Texas Panhandle, chasing the sunset across flat, endless plains that stretched to every horizon. The sky was doing that thing it does out here, turning impossible shades of orange and purple and red, like the atmosphere was on fire. Beautiful and slightly unsettling at the same time, the way nature can be when it reminds you how small you really are. My phone was sitting in the cup holder, fully charged, GPS running, showing the straight line of I-40 cutting west toward New Mexico. The radio was playing classic rock, some song I had heard 1,000 times before. Everything was completely normal, routine, safe. Then my phone screen went dark. Not dead, not powered off, just dark, like someone had thrown a blanket over it. I picked it up and the screen stayed black even though I could feel it was still on, still warm, still working somehow but refusing to show me anything. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Held it down for a hard reset. Nothing. The device had simply stopped communicating with me. That was the first creepy moment, though I did not recognize it as such yet. I figured it was a glitch, a software bug, something that would fix itself. I tossed the phone back in the cup holder and focused on driving, telling myself I would deal with it at the next town. But the next town never came. The stretch between Amarillo and Albuquerque is long, everyone knows that, but there are towns along the way. Small places, sure, just gas stations and diners and maybe a motel, but they exist. They have names, they appear on maps, except that night, they did not appear at all. I drove for an hour, then 2 hours, then 3, and I saw nothing but empty highway and darkness pressing in from all sides. The truly disturbing part was the absence of other vehicles. Interstate 40 is a major trucking route, busy at all hours, but I had not seen another car in over 90 minutes. No trucks, no RVs, nothing, just my headlights cutting through the black and the white lines flickering past in endless rhythm. The isolation became absolute, suffocating, like I was the last person left in the world. I tried the radio, static on every station. Not the normal kind of static you get between signals, but something else, something that almost sounded like whispering if you listened long enough. Voices speaking words I could not quite make out, rising and falling in waves that made my skin crawl. I turned it off and drove in silence, which was somehow worse. The road signs had stopped making sense. I passed one that said Albuquerque 487 miles. That was impossible. Albuquerque should have been maybe 200 miles away at most. I kept driving, certain I had misread it in the dark, but the next sign said Albuquerque 502 miles. The distance was increasing. I was driving toward my destination but getting further away with every mile, like the highway was stretching itself out, extending into infinity. Fear finally wrapped its cold fingers around my chest. This was not a glitch. This was not confusion. Something was wrong in a fundamental way, in a way that broke the basic rules of geography and distance and reality itself. I considered turning around, but turning around to what? Back to Amarillo? How far back was that now? And what if the road behind me had stretched too? What if I was trapped in the middle of an impossible distance that kept growing in both directions? That was when I saw the lights. Not headlights, not street lights, just lights floating in the darkness off to my right, maybe half a mile from the highway. They bobbed and weaved like lanterns carried by people walking, dozens of them, moving in the same direction I was driving. The sight should have been comforting, should have meant civilization, other humans, safety. Instead, it filled me with a horror I cannot adequately describe. Those lights felt wrong, predatory, ancient. I pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to outpace them, but they kept up effortlessly, matching my speed, staying exactly parallel to my position on the highway. And now I could see more details in my peripheral vision. Shapes moving between the lights, figures that were too tall and moved in ways that human bodies should not move, with joints that bent at the wrong angles. The temperature in my car dropped suddenly, my breath misting in the air despite the heater running full blast. Frost began forming on the inside of my windows in patterns that looked disturbingly intentional, like symbols or letters from an alphabet I did not recognize. The steering wheel was ice cold under my hands. Then my headlights caught something in the road ahead. A car, parked sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the highway. An old sedan from the 70s or 80s, covered in rust and desert dust, with all its doors hanging open like broken wings. I slammed on my brakes, my tires screaming, and I managed to stop maybe 20 feet away from collision. The silence that followed was oppressive. My engine had died, just cut out completely, and when I tried to restart it, I got nothing. Not even a click. The headlights were still on, though, casting long shadows from the abandoned car, and in those shadows I saw movement. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat of that rusted sedan. A man, I think, though the shadows made it hard to see clearly. He was slumped over the steering wheel in a position that suggested he had been there a very long time. Months, maybe years, and yet as I watched, frozen with fear in my own vehicle, he slowly raised his head and turned to look at me. His eyes reflected my headlights like an animal, his eyes glowing white and empty. His mouth opened, and even though I could not hear him through my closed windows, I could see him screaming, see his jaw distending impossibly wide, see something dark and writhing in the back of his throat. I scrambled for my door handle, some primal instinct telling me I needed to run, needed to get away from the car and the highway and whatever nightmarish place I had driven into. But the door would not open. None of the doors would open. The locks clicked down by themselves every time I tried to pull them up, and the windows would not roll down. And I was trapped in a metal box with that thing in the other car still screaming silently at me. The floating lights were closer now. I could see them in my mirrors, surrounding my car, and the shapes carrying them were pressed up against my windows. Their faces obscured by shadow, but their breath fogging the glass. Long, skeletal fingers scraped against the metal, a sound like nails on a chalkboard that went on and on and on. I closed my eyes. I did not know why. It was a childish response, the kind of thing you do when you are 5 years old and think monsters cannot get you if you cannot see them. But I closed my eyes and I waited for whatever was going to happen next, certain I was going to die on this impossible stretch of highway that should not exist. And then everything stopped. The scratching stopped. The cold stopped. The horrible feeling of being watched by things that wanted to pull me apart and see what I was made of, that stopped too. I sat in perfect silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, too terrified to open my eyes, too terrified to move at all. When I finally looked, dawn was breaking. Pale gray light was spreading across the horizon, and the abandoned car was gone. The floating lights were gone. My engine was running again, had been running, and warm air was blowing from the vents. My phone was working, showing 6:23 a.m. and a long list of missed calls from my wife and my boss and my kids. The road sign ahead said Albuquerque, 47 miles. I drove straight to the nearest town and checked into a motel, told the clerk I was sick, told him I needed a room immediately. I slept for 16 hours, and when I woke up I called my wife and told her I had car trouble, told her I was fine, told her a lie because I knew she would never believe the truth. But here's the truly chilling part, the part that keeps me awake at night now, afraid to close my eyes. When I finally looked at my phone, GPS history, trying to figure out where I had been that night, the map showed something impossible. My location tracker showed me driving on I-40. Yes, but not on any version of I-40 that exists in our world. The line on the map looped and spiraled and doubled back on itself in ways that made no geometric sense, covering thousands of miles while somehow staying in the same 100-mile stretch of highway. And at certain points, the GPS showed my position as being nowhere at all, just blank space off the edge of the map, in areas that have no coordinates, no names, no existence in our accepted reality. I am home now, safe in my house in Phoenix, surrounded by my family and my normal life. But I cannot stop thinking about that night, about those 4 hours that somehow became 4 days, about the things I saw in the darkness between cities. Because I know now that there are places in America where you can drive offline, where your signal dies and your GPS fails and you slip through a crack in the world into somewhere else. Somewhere that has been waiting since long before highways existed, long before humans built roads across the empty places, long before we convinced ourselves we had mapped and measured and tamed every inch of this country. The stretch between towns can feel longer than it should. With no signal and no landmarks, the isolation becomes absolute. And in that isolation, in that empty space between the places we know and the places we think we are going, something hungry is waiting for travelers who lose their way. I still drive for work. I have bills to pay, a family to support, a life to maintain. But now I plan my routes carefully, avoiding long stretches of empty highway, making sure I travel during daylight, keeping my tank full so I never have to stop in the dark. And I watch my phone obsessively, checking for signal strength, checking for GPS accuracy, terrified of the moment when the screen might go dark again and I might find myself back in that nightmare place where distance has no meaning and time does not flow the right direction. Because I know I was lucky. I know I was allowed to leave. And I know that not everyone who drives into that darkness comes back. Story 9. Phones down, roads empty. Have you ever noticed the exact moment when every phone in a room dies at once? That horrifying silence when the constant hum of digital life just stops? I have. And I need you to understand that when it happened to me and 17 other people on Interstate 40 outside of Albuquerque, it was not a coincidence. It was not a solar flare or a technical glitch. It was the beginning of something so terrifying and disturbing that I still wake up screaming, clawing at my throat, convinced I am back there on that empty highway where the darkness came alive. My name is David Chen, and I am a sales manager for a medical supply company based in Phoenix. 47 years old, divorced, 2 kids I see every other weekend. The kind of ordinary American life you would not look twice at. I had been driving back from a conference in Oklahoma City, taking the long route through New Mexico because I actually enjoy the desert scenery. Something peaceful about all that empty space, or at least that is what I used to think before I learned what can hide in empty places. It was just after 9 p.m. when everything changed. Clear October night, the kind where you can see a million stars bleeding across the black sky. I was doing 75 in the right lane, classic rock playing low on the radio, and my phone was mounted on the dashboard showing me the GPS route home. Still had another 4 hours of driving ahead of me, but I was making good time and feeling alert. Then my phone died, just went completely black. No warning, no low battery notification, just instant death. The screen went dark and would not respond to anything. I tapped it, pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead as a brick. That was unsettling enough, but what happened next sent ice water through my veins. Every single vehicle on the highway, and there were maybe 20 of us spread across both lanes, suddenly had their brake lights flare bright red in the darkness. Not because people were stopping, but because something had killed every phone, every GPS, every piece of electronics in every car at the exact same moment. The radio in my car cut to static. The dashboard display flickered and died. Even my electronic key fob stopped working. I could feel it in my pocket. Suddenly just a useless piece of plastic and metal. The only things still functioning were the basic mechanical systems. Engine, steering, brakes. Everything that did not need a computer chip was fine. Everything else was gone. Traffic slowed to a crawl as drivers tried to figure out what was happening. I could see people in other cars holding up their phones, shaking them, pressing buttons with increasingly frantic gestures. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and behind me, red taillights created an eerie chain of glowing eyes in the night. That is when I noticed the silence, the terrifying, unnatural silence. No cars were coming from the other direction. Interstate 40 is a major east-west corridor, and even at night, you should see headlights approaching every few minutes. But the westbound lanes were completely empty, just black asphalt disappearing into darkness, not a single light in sight. I kept driving, but slower now, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something was deeply wrong. The fear was building in my chest. That primal instinct that screams danger even when your rational mind cannot explain why. Other drivers were pulling over onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in mechanical rhythm. But I kept going, desperate to reach Albuquerque, to find help, to understand what was happening. Then I saw the first abandoned car, a silver Honda sitting in the middle of the right lane. Driver, this door hanging wide open, interior light casting a pale glow onto the asphalt. The car was still running. I could see exhaust vapor rising in my headlights. But there was nobody inside. Nobody standing nearby. Just an empty vehicle sitting there like its driver had vanished mid-journey. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. I swerved around the Honda and accelerated, the engine roaring in the eerie quiet. But half a mile later, there was another one. A pickup truck this time, also abandoned, also running. Driver, this door open to the night. And then another, and another, a trail of empty vehicles stretching down the highway like breadcrumbs in a nightmare fairy tale. The horror of it was overwhelming. Where had the drivers gone? Why had they left their cars running? And why was the road ahead still completely empty of oncoming traffic? Interstate 40 should have been busy, even at night. But it was like every vehicle heading west had simply vanished. I passed a sign that said Albuquerque was 30 miles ahead. I focused on that. 30 miles to civilization. To lights. To people. To help. I could make it. I had to make it. But the abandoned cars kept appearing, more and more of them now, some pulled over properly, others sitting at odd angles across lanes like their drivers had just stopped thinking mid-turn. That is when I heard the sound. A deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was not a mechanical sound. It was organic, alive, like the vibration of some massive creature breathing. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. It was a frequency that human bodies were not meant to experience, something that bypassed my ears and went straight into my bones. The darkness itself seemed to thicken. Shadows pooled between the abandoned vehicles, deeper and blacker than normal night should allow. My headlights could not penetrate them fully. It was like the darkness had substance, had weight, had intention, and it was spreading across the highway like spilled ink. I saw movement then, something in the shadows between two abandoned cars, a shape that was wrong, that did not match any animal or person I had ever seen. It moved in a way that hurt to watch, like it existed in too many dimensions at once, folding and unfolding in angles that made my brain scream in protest. The shape was tall, impossibly tall, and where it moved, the darkness followed like a living cloak. Pure terror flooded my system. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to escape, to get away from whatever that thing was. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, and my old Camry roared forward, engine whining as I pushed it past 80, past 90 miles per hour. The speedometer needle climbed, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion, like the darkness itself was thick as water and I was trying to swim through it. More shapes appeared in my peripheral vision. Tall, wrong, moving with that same reality-breaking motion that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. They were not chasing me. They were herding me, guiding me forward like a sheep being driven toward a pen. And ahead, maybe 5 miles down the road, I could see why. There was a light, a single point of illumination in the ocean of darkness. Not the warm yellow of streetlights or the white of headlights. This was different. A sickly green phosphorescence that pulsed in rhythm with that deep, bone-rattling hum. It was coming from somewhere off the highway, maybe a mile into the desert. And every abandoned car, every empty vehicle I had passed, was pointing toward it. Like they had all been driving to that light before their occupants disappeared. The rational part of my brain, the part that still believed in logic and science and a world that made sense, tried to find an explanation. Military experiment, secret government facility, mass hallucination from some chemical leak. But that part of me was getting smaller, drowning in the rising tide of primal fear that knew, absolutely knew, that I was in the presence of something ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. I could see the exit for Albuquerque ahead. The sign glowed dimly in my headlights, promising escape, promising civilization. But as I got closer, my heart sank. The off-ramp was blocked. Not by a barrier or construction, but by cars. Dozens of cars, packed together in a massive pileup that completely sealed the exit. And all of them were empty. All of them had their doors open. All of them were still running. Headlights pointing in every direction like searchlights sweeping through a prison yard. I had no choice but to keep going on the interstate. Keep moving forward into that darkness, toward that pulsing green light that was getting brighter with every mile. The shapes in the shadows were closer now, close enough that I could almost see details, though my mind refused to process what my eyes were showing me. Limbs that bent in too many places. Surfaces that were neither skin nor shell nor anything earthly. And always that sense of vast intelligence behind them, cold and calculating and completely alien. My fuel gauge was dropping fast. I had been pushing the engine hard, and I was burning through gas at an alarming rate. The needle was below a quarter tank now. If I ran out of fuel out here, I would be just another empty car on this haunted highway. Another piece of evidence in a mystery that nobody would ever solve. The green light was directly ahead now, maybe 2 miles away. I could see that it was not coming from a building or a vehicle. It was coming from the ground itself, from a massive circular area in the desert that glowed with that disturbing bioluminescence. And around the edges of that circle, I could see them clearly now. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all standing perfectly still, all facing toward the center of the light. Their arms hung at their sides, their heads tilted at identical angles, their bodies swaying slightly in unison like wheat in a breeze. But they were not moving on their own. Something was moving them, something inside that green circle, something I could not see but could feel pressing against my consciousness like a thumb pressing into soft clay. It was trying to get into my head, trying to make me stop, trying to make me get out of my car and walk toward that light and join all the others standing in their mindless vigil. I screamed and wrenched the wheel hard to the right, sending my car careening across lanes and onto the shoulder. The tires hit gravel and sand, and I fought to keep control as I left the highway completely, plunging into the desert itself. Scrub brush scraped against my doors. Rocks pinged off my undercarriage. But I kept going, turning away from that light, driving perpendicular to the highway, desperate to escape its pull. The shapes followed me. I could see them in my mirrors, gliding across the desert terrain like they were not bound by physics or gravity. They were gaining. The darkness around them was so absolute that it seemed to devour my headlight beams. And that hum, that horrible organic vibration, was getting louder, deeper, shaking my car apart from the inside. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The shapes vanished. The hum cut off. The green light behind me flickered and died, plunging the desert into normal darkness. And my phone, sitting dead on the passenger seat, suddenly blazed to life. The screen lit up with notifications, messages, missed calls, everything flooding back at once. I slammed on the brakes and sat there in the silent desert, engine idling, my entire body shaking with terror and adrenaline. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and tried to call 911, but my fingers would not cooperate. I dropped it twice before finally getting through. The operator answered, and I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in a jumbled rush of fear and confusion. She asked for my location, and I looked at my GPS, which was working again. I was 15 miles north of Interstate 40, deep in the desert, but somehow I could see lights in the distance. The lights of Albuquerque, warm and yellow and beautifully normal. They found me 3 hours later, state police, concerned and professional, treating me like I might be drunk or having a mental breakdown. They had not received any other reports of strange activity on Interstate 40. They had not found any abandoned vehicles. When they escorted me back to the highway, it was full of normal traffic flowing in both directions. Everything was exactly as it should be. But I know what I saw. I know what happened out there. And 3 days later, the news reported that 18 people had gone missing from the Albuquerque area. All last seen on October 15th. All last known to be traveling on Interstate 40. Their vehicles were never found. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed at all. I quit my job, sold my car. I do not drive anymore, especially not at night, especially not on empty highways. Because I understand now that there are places where the barriers between our world and something else grow thin. Places where something vast and alien and hungry can reach through and pluck us out of existence like we are nothing more than ants on a sidewalk. The phones going down was not an accident. It was deliberate. It was a signal. It was them announcing their presence and shutting down the one thing that connects us to each other. The one thing that proves we are not alone. And when the roads go empty, when you find yourself driving through a corridor of abandoned vehicles with no oncoming traffic and shapes moving in shadows that are too dark and too deep, you need to understand that you are already caught, already in the web, already being herded towards something that wants to add you to its collection. I still have nightmares about that green light, about all those people standing in perfect stillness, being slowly consumed by something I could not see. And sometimes, late at night, I feel that hum again. That deep, bone-rattling vibration that bypasses my ears and goes straight into my cells. It is fainter now, distant, but it is always there. A reminder that whatever I escaped from is still out there, still hungry, still waiting. So if you are ever driving alone at night and your phone dies without warning, and you notice that the roads around you have gone empty, and you start seeing abandoned cars with their doors hanging open and engines still running, do not investigate. Do not slow down. Do not try to help. Drive as fast as you can in any direction except the one you feel pulled toward. Because that pull is not curiosity. It is not concern. It is them reaching into your mind, guiding you toward the light that consumes everything it touches. And whatever you do, do not look at the shapes in the shadows. Do not try to understand them. Do not let your mind process what your eyes are seeing. Because once you truly see them, once you understand what they are, they will know. And they will never let you go. Story 10. Place that doesn't. To appear on coverage maps, I am going to tell you about a location that does not officially exist. A place so thoroughly erased from modern infrastructure that I sometimes wonder if I actually experienced what happened there or if the whole thing was some kind of shared nightmare. but I know it happened. I have scars to prove it, not on my body, but deeper than that. Scars on my mind that will never fully heal. It started with a road trip that seemed perfectly normal. 4 of us, all friends from college, decided to take a week in late September to drive down the California coast. We were all men in our early 40s, the kind of guys who had gotten caught up in jobs and mortgages and the general horror of adult life. We wanted to recapture something from our younger years, some sense of adventure and freedom. We mapped out the route, booked some hotels, and set out on what we thought would be a nostalgic and restorative journey. None of us had any idea that we were driving towards something genuinely terrifying. The first 2 days were perfect, the kind of travel experience you dream about. We drove through Big Sur, watched the sunset from cliffs that made you feel insignificant and small. We ate good food, told old stories, and felt like we were finally alive after years of just going through the motions of existing. On the 3rd day, we decided to take a detour. One of us, a guy named Marcus, had read about a small town called Redemption Valley about 40 minutes inland from the coast. It wasn't on our original itinerary, but it looked interesting on the map. A forgotten place that time had passed by. We decided to check it out. This was the first mistake we made. Not the worst one, but the first one that started the chain of events that would lead us into something dark and unsettling. The drive inland took us away from the coast highway and onto smaller roads. 2-lane highways that wound through redwood forests and oak-covered hills. The landscape was beautiful in a way that felt almost ominous, like nature was showing us its power and indifference to human existence. As we drove, we started noticing something strange. Our cell phone signal was dropping. Not gradually, but all at once. 1 minute, everyone had full bars and data connection. The next minute, nothing. Complete absence of signal. We all held up our phones, checking for any trace of service, finding nothing but the words, "No service," printed on our screens. This wasn't unusual in itself. California has plenty of dead zones where mountains block signals or infrastructure just doesn't exist. But it was the timing that felt eerie. It was like we had crossed an invisible line, a boundary between the modern connected world and something cut off and forgotten. We continued driving anyway. The road started getting worse, going from well-maintained asphalt to cracked pavement with weeds growing through. The forest around us became denser, the trees closer to the road, creating a tunnel-like effect that made the drive feel increasingly isolating and claustrophobic. I remember Marcus making a joke about how we were driving into some horrifying horror movie scenario, and we all laughed nervously. None of us knew how right he was, how the creepy atmosphere we were joking about was actually a warning, a sign that we were approaching something that the modern world had deliberately cut itself off from. Then we saw the sign. It was wooden and weathered, barely visible through the overgrown plants that surrounded it. Redemption Valley, population 43. Beneath that, someone had carved additional words into the wood with a knife or something sharp. The words read, "Turn back now." Someone had put actual effort into that warning, had taken the time to deface the sign after it was made. This should have stopped us. This should have been the moment we turned around and drove back to civilization. But we didn't. We convinced ourselves it was a prank, a joke left by teenagers or someone with a dark sense of humor. The town itself was the most eerie place I had ever seen. The buildings were old, most of them dating back to the 1920s or 30s, architectural styles that belonged to an era that had completely vanished from American life. Many of the structures were boarded up, windows covered with plywood, doors blocked with chains. There were maybe a dozen occupied-looking buildings, and we could see a few people moving through the streets, but they didn't look right. They moved slowly, deliberately, without any of the natural flow that characterizes normal human movement. It was like watching puppets being manipulated by strings. The main street was eerily silent. No music, no traffic sounds, no voices. Just the wind moving through the empty space and the sound of our car engine as we drove slowly toward what might have been the town center. We passed a gas station that looked like it hadn't operated since the 1950s. A grocery store with empty shelves visible through the grimy windows. A building that might have been a church, its cross still visible but tilted at an angle that suggested abandonment and decay. Everything about this place screamed danger, screamed that we should leave immediately. But there was something else too, something that pulled at us and made us want to stay, to explore, to understand what had happened here. That something was a feeling, a sense that we were witnessing something genuinely important, something that the outside world was deliberately ignoring. I would later understand that this pull was part of the terrifying trap, part of what made this place so horrifying and so dangerous. The place wanted us to stay. It wanted us to discover its secrets. We found the diner, a small establishment with a neon sign that still flickered, powered by some source we couldn't identify. Inside, it was perfectly preserved, as if frozen in time somewhere around 1955. A counter with stools, booths with cracked red vinyl, a jukebox in the corner that looked like it might still work. And behind the counter, a woman who might have been 70 or might have been 170. It was impossible to tell. Her face was smooth, but her eyes were ancient, holding a depth of experience that made me deeply uncomfortable. She didn't speak to us, just nodded when we came in and gestured for us to sit. We sat in one of the booths, all of us feeling the eerie sensation of being trapped in some kind of alternate reality. The woman brought us coffee that we hadn't ordered and placed it in front of us without speaking. Then she disappeared into the kitchen. The coffee smelled wrong, like it had been sitting for much longer than the few minutes since it was poured. None of us drank it. None of us wanted to ingest anything that came from this place. That was when my friend David noticed something on the wall. There were photographs, dozens of them, pinned haphazardly to the wall behind the counter. Photographs of groups of people, all of them smiling, all of them posed as if for a family portrait. But the photographs dated back decades. The earliest one we could see was from 1957. The most recent one was from approximately 2 weeks ago. And in nearly every photograph, the same faces appeared. The same people, aging across the decades, their faces changing slightly but their essential identity remaining the same. The woman returned from the kitchen and saw David looking at the photographs. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was thin and raspy, like it hadn't been used in a very long time. She asked us where we were from, how many of us there were, if we were planning to stay. There was something in the way she asked those questions that made me understand they weren't casual pleasantries. They were important. They mattered in some way I couldn't quite comprehend. I found myself answering without thinking, telling her our names, our home cities, information we should have kept private in this horrible place. When I told her I was from San Diego, she smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. She said that was good, that San Diego was far enough away, that the distance would matter. She told us that Redemption Valley didn't appear on coverage maps because it wasn't supposed to be found by most people. The phone service didn't work because the town had made a deliberate decision long ago to cut itself off from the outside world. They had requested that all service providers simply stop providing signal to the area. She made it sound like they had politely asked for a favor, as if cellular networks could just decide to completely ignore an entire location. But when she explained why they had done this, everything became chillingly clear. Redemption Valley had made a deal, she said. A long time ago, when the town was dying, when young people were leaving and businesses were failing and there was no future, they had made an arrangement with something. Something that wasn't quite human. Something that existed in the spaces between what we understood as reality. In exchange for prosperity, the town agreed to provide what the thing wanted. Sustenance. Specifically, it wanted people. Not to kill, necessarily, but to take, to absorb, to integrate into something larger than individual human existence. The woman explained that the photographs showed the same people across the decades because they weren't aging in the normal way. They were being preserved, kept in a state of stasis, existing in the town as both themselves and as something else. They were part of the entity now, extensions of its consciousness, but they retained some fragment of their original identities. And the thing that was most disturbing about her explanation was that she said it wasn't actually terrible. The people who had been taken, she insisted, were happier now. They didn't experience fear or pain or the crushing weight of human existence. They were at peace. We left the diner without finishing that eerie conversation, without allowing her to finish explaining whatever arrangement had been made with the entity that inhabited this place. We ran back to our car and drove, speeding through the narrow streets of Redemption Valley toward the road that would take us out. But the roads had changed. The streets twisted in ways that didn't make logical sense, leading us deeper into town instead of out of it. We found ourselves back at the main street, then at the diner again, then at a building that hadn't been visible before, a large structure that looked like it might have been a church or a town hall. The fear was becoming absolute now. This was real. This was actually happening. We were in a place where the normal rules of reality didn't to apply, where geography was negotiable and the landscape bent to serve something, this purpose. We drove frantically, taking different roads, trying different directions, but every path led us back to the center of town. The sun was setting, and in the failing light, we could see more of the people who lived here. They were standing in the streets, watching our car, their movements synchronized, their expressions blank. It was Marcus who finally found a road that led out. A road that hadn't been visible before, or that perhaps only became visible when the entity decided we needed a way to escape. He drove faster than was safe, swerving around obstacles, pushing the engine to its limits. Behind us, the town seemed to be receding, the buildings fading as if they were becoming less real. We burst out of the forest and suddenly we were back on a main highway, back in the modern world. The car, his phone suddenly showing full bars of signal as if we had never been cut off at all. We drove for hours, not speaking, just trying to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and that place. When we finally stopped at a hotel in a normal town with normal infrastructure, we immediately tried to find information about Redemption Valley online. But there was nothing, no listings, no photographs, no historical records, nothing that suggested the place had ever existed. When we tried to navigate back to it using GPS, there was no route. The location showed up as wilderness, unnavigable terrain. It was like the place was actively hiding itself from the digital world. But here is where it gets even more horrifying. A week after we returned home, David started experiencing something disturbing. He said he would sometimes lose consciousness for periods of time, maybe minutes or maybe hours. He couldn't tell. During these periods of lost time, he had no memories, no sense of what was happening. When he came to, he would find himself in different locations. His body moved to places without his conscious participation. He described it as being a passenger in his own body, aware but unable to control his actions. 2 weeks after the trip, David's family took him to the hospital. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. His brain scans were normal. His blood work was normal. But David kept insisting that something was wrong, that something from that place had attached itself to him, that he was gradually becoming less himself and more something else. He became increasingly agitated, increasingly convinced that he was being absorbed into something vast and incomprehensible. The 3rd week after our trip, David drove his car off a cliff near his home. The police called it suicide, but his family knew it wasn't. His final text message, sent to all 3 of us, contained a single line. "It took me. I am in the spaces now. You will be too." Marcus, the other friend who had driven frantically to escape Redemption Valley, started exhibiting similar symptoms a few days later. Periods of lost time, movements he couldn't remember making, a growing sense that he was being hollowed out from the inside and replaced with something else. He tried to explain it to me, but he couldn't find the words. He just kept repeating that he could feel it, that it was pulling at him, that it was bringing him back. Last month, I found Marcus's car parked on a remote highway about 50 miles from Redemption Valley. He wasn't in it, but his wallet was there, his phone was there, his keys were there. Everything he needed to exist in the normal world, all of it left behind, like he had simply decided he no longer needed to be human. I am the last one left, the only survivor of our trip to Redemption Valley who hasn't been taken. And I can feel it coming for me. Sometimes my phone loses signal for no reason I can explain. Sometimes I find myself in locations I don't remember driving to. My car, this mileage increased, but my memory's absent. Sometimes I see the woman from the diner standing on street corners in my city, always in my peripheral vision, always smiling that ancient smile. I'm writing this as a warning and as a confession. If you ever find yourself on a highway in rural California and you see a sign for a town called Redemption Valley, to go there. To be curious. To think you can handle it, or that you'll be fine, or that it might be interesting to explore. It's not just a place. It's a hunger. It is something that feeds on human consciousness, that wants to absorb people into itself, that exists in the spaces between reality where the rules we live by to apply. And if you notice that your phone suddenly loses signal, if you experience periods of lost time that you can explain, if you see the same ancient faces in crowds watching you, then you already know the truth. You've already been marked. You're already becoming part of it. The place that doesn't appear on coverage maps has already found you, And soon you'll understand that there are far worse things in this world than simply dying. There are fates that erase you completely, that turn you into something that exists between moments. Something that watches and waits and slowly becomes less human with every passing day. I feel it tightening around me now as I write this. My eyes are getting heavy. My consciousness is becoming fragmented. Soon I'll be driving toward that town again, toward Redemption Valley, toward the thing that waits in those redwood forests. And when I get there, I want to be able to resist anymore. I'll step out of my car, and I'll walk toward the diner, and the woman will smile, and I'll finally understand what it means to be at peace in a way that has nothing to do with being alive. The coverage map's done to show Redemption Valley because the thing that lives there made sure the world would ignore it. And now, it's making sure the world ignores what happens to people like us. We simply disappear from the digital realm, from GPS, from cell phone records. We fade away into that place where signal doesn't to exist, where time doesn't to work the same way, where we become part of something bigger and darker and infinitely more patient than human existence. If you, rereading this, and if you recognize any of what I described, then you know what is coming. You know that there's nowhere you can run where it won to find you. The modern world with all its connectivity and surveillance offers no protection from something that exists in the spaces where our technology can reach. Redemption Valley will keep taking people, slowly, methodically, patiently building its collection of half-human consciousness vessels. And we will never know for certain whether the people we know are still themselves or whether they've already been replaced by something wearing their shape.